Sung Jinho didn't believe in coincidences. He built his entire life around the idea that everything had a reason, a cause, a chain of events that could be traced back to a single decision. That was how he ran Seoul's most feared underground syndicate by 30 years old, not through blind luck, but through the kind of cold, calculated thinking that made men sweat when his name came up in conversation. He was the type who remembered every face, every debt, every slight. So when he walked into Hanamdong's most exclusive rooftop restaurant for what was supposed to be a routine dinner with his lieutenant, and saw her sitting 3 tables away, his entire chest tightened like someone had wrapped a wire around his ribs and pulled. Sophia Ademi. She was wearing a deep burgundy dress, her locks pinned up in a loose way that looked careless but probably took effort. Her skin caught the evening light the way it always had, like she was holding warmth inside her rather than just reflecting it. She was laughing at something the woman across from her said, and the sound didn't reach him, but he saw her shoulders shake, and that was enough. That was more than enough. He hadn't seen her in 2 years, 1 month, and he stopped himself from finishing that count. What stopped him completely, what made his Lieutenant Park Taeyong quietly follow his boss's frozen gaze and then very wisely say nothing, was the unmistakable curve beneath that burgundy dress. Sophia was pregnant. Visibly, undeniably, at least 7 months pregnant. Sung sat down slowly, like a man who needed to remind his legs what they were for. He picked up the menu. He put it down. He picked up his water glass and set it back without drinking. "Do you want to leave?" Taeyong asked. "No." "Do you want me to?" I said no. Taeyong went quiet and developed a sudden intense interest in the bread basket. Sung did not look away from Sophia for the next 4 minutes. He counted. She hadn't seen him yet, or if she had, she was doing a flawless performance of someone who hadn't. He knew her well enough to know the difference, or at least he used to. 2 years changes people. He had changed. He assumed she had too. He just hadn't assumed she'd changed into someone sitting across a restaurant from him, carrying a child that could not, according to 3 separate fertility specialists, and 1 very uncomfortable conversation in their 2nd year of marriage, be his. Because that was the thing nobody outside their closed circle knew. The reason the divorce, which Seoul's gossip networks had chewed on for months, had never been fully explained. Sung Jinho, feared by men twice his age, ruler of an empire built on leverage and silence, had been told at 28 that he was infertile. Not low probability, not slim chances. The kind of diagnosis that came with sympathetic eyes from the doctor and a very long, quiet drive home. Sophia had cried. He hadn't, not in front of her. He'd gone to his office and sat in the dark for 2 hours, and when he came out he was already building the wall. Not because he blamed her, she'd done nothing wrong, there was nothing to blame, but because something in him didn't know how to hold that kind of grief without turning it into distance. And distance, for a man like Sung, had a way of becoming permanent. The divorce had been civil, painfully civil. She'd taken her things, her passport, her mother's photograph from the bedroom wall and left. He'd signed everything his lawyer put in front of him without asking questions, because asking questions would have meant admitting he wanted answers, and wanting answers would have meant admitting he still wanted her. So he let her go to Lagos. He heard from Taeyong, who heard from someone else that she'd gone back to finish her master's degree. Good. That was good. She deserved that. He had gone back to running his empire. And now she was here, in Seoul, pregnant. The math was not complicated. 2 years since the divorce. That was the first twist of the wire in his chest. The second was something darker, something he didn't want to name yet, something that lived in the space between what was medically impossible and what his eyes were currently showing him. Because even if his infertility was absolute, even if there was 0 margin for error in that diagnosis, the part of his brain that had never fully let Sophia go was already asking a question he wasn't ready to ask out loud. Whose child is that? He stood up before he decided to stand up. His body made the decision independently of whatever remained of his reason. Taeyong grabbed his sleeve, the one and only time in 4 years the man had physically touched him without permission, and Sung looked down at the hand, then at Taeyong's face. "Boss," Taeyong's voice was low, "think." "I am thinking." "Think more." Sung removed the hand from his sleeve carefully, the way you'd remove something fragile from somewhere it didn't belong, and walked across the restaurant. He was 6 feet from her table when Sophia looked up. He saw it, the exact moment her eyes found him. The laughter left her face first, then the ease left her shoulders, and then something complicated moved across her expression that he spent the entire walk toward her trying to read. It wasn't fear. He knew what fear looked like on people, and it didn't look like that. It was something closer to the face a person makes when they've been rehearsing a conversation for months and are suddenly furious that it's starting before they're ready. She looked down at the table for exactly 2 seconds, then back up at him. Sung, her voice was level. Her voice was always level. It was one of the first things he'd noticed about her, that she spoke like someone who had decided in advance that she would not be rattled. He pulled out the empty chair at her table and sat down without being invited, which was rude, and he knew it, and he didn't move. "You're in Seoul," he said. "I can see that you can see that." The woman across from Sophia, he registered her now, mid-30s, Yoruba features, a look on her face that said she knew exactly who he was and was deciding how scared to be, started to gather her bag. "Don't," Sophia said to her. "Stay, Amara." Amara stayed, but she pushed her chair back 2 inches. Sung looked at Sophia. Sophia looked at Sung. Neither of them looked at the obvious thing sitting between them until he decided they were done pretending. "How far along?" Sophia's jaw tightened. "That's not a conversation we're having." "Sophia." "Not here, Sung. Not like this." "Then where? When?" She looked at him for a long moment, and the thing in her eyes, he finally placed it. It wasn't fury. It wasn't nerves. It was the look of someone holding a secret so large it had started to feel like a physical weight, and some part of them was almost tired of carrying it alone. "Call my number," she said quietly, "if it still works." It still worked. He had never deleted it. He called at 10:47 that night. She picked up on the 3rd ring, which told him she'd been waiting, which told him more than she probably wanted it to. He was standing on the balcony of his Itaewon penthouse, the city spread out below him like a circuit board, all light and geometry. He'd sent Taeyong home an hour ago after the man had spent 40 minutes hovering in the kitchen under the pretense of making tea, which he never drank. "Where are you staying?" Sung asked. "Hotel Naru, Mapogu." Not a place he would have chosen for her. Not bad, just not what she deserved. He filed that thought away before it became something he acted on. "Come here," he said. "Absolutely not." "Then I'll come there." "Sung," she said his name the way she used to when he was pushing past a boundary she'd drawn clearly, not angry yet, but close and certain. "I said call me so we could arrange a proper conversation, not so you could summon me somewhere at 11 at night like one of your associates." "You're not one of my associates." "No, I'm your ex-wife, which means you have even less authority over my location than you do over them." He was quiet for a moment. On the street below, a delivery bike cut through an intersection. Somewhere behind him, the city hummed its usual hum. "Fine," he said. "Tomorrow, wherever you want." She named a cafe in Yeonnam-dong, the kind of small civilian place he almost never went to. Exposed brick, wooden stools, the smell of ground coffee soaked into the walls. A place where people came to read and no one wore a suit. She'd always liked those kinds of places. He'd always made fun of her for it, quietly, with the particular type of fondness that never quite admitted it was fondness. 2 o'clock, she said. "I'll be there at 1:55. "I know you will," and she hung up. He stood on the balcony for another hour. The question he hadn't been able to stop turning over since the restaurant wasn't just whose child it was why she was here. Sophia Adami did not do things without intention. She'd been back in Seoul for however long, visibly pregnant, eating dinner in a restaurant that sat squarely inside the neighborhood his name was most associated with, and she hadn't contacted him. That was a choice. Everything with Sophia was a choice. She was the most deliberate person he'd ever known, which had been one of their strengths as a couple and one of the quiet frustrations, because her deliberateness meant that when she decided to close a door, she closed it completely. No draft, no gap. So what was she doing leaving a gap now? He went inside, poured 2 fingers of whiskey, didn't drink it, and went to bed. He lay flat on his back and stared at the ceiling the way he used to when something in his operations wasn't adding up, running the variables, looking for the piece that changed the picture. Except the variables here weren't shipment routes or financial ledgers. They were a woman and a pregnancy and 2 years of silence, and a look in her eyes that he hadn't been able to shake since it landed on him. He was at the cafe at 1:48. Sophia arrived at 2 on the dot. She was wearing a loose cream top and wide-leg trousers, her locks down today, and she moved through the cafe entrance with the particular kind of care that late-stage pregnancy demanded, one hand briefly touching the door frame as she stepped in. Sung stood. She saw him stand and made a small expression that might have been amusement or might have been something more complicated, and she sat across from him without ceremony. A server came. She ordered a rooibos tea and a sweet potato scone. He ordered a black coffee and then realized he didn't want it. They looked at each other. "You look well," he said, because he had to start somewhere and it was true. "You look like you didn't sleep." "I didn't." "I did," she said pleasantly, and he felt the edge in it, the reminder that she had not spent her night on a balcony in the dark. "I've been sleeping very well lately, actually. Better than I did when we were married." He absorbed that. "That's not fair." "No," she agreed, "but it's accurate." He wrapped both hands around the coffee he didn't want. "Sophia, I need you to tell me what's happening." She looked at him steadily. "What specifically do you think is happening?" "Don't do that." "Don't do what?" "The thing where you answer questions with questions, until I've said everything and you've said nothing." Something shifted in her expression, briefly, just a flicker, and she looked down at her tea. When she looked back up, the composure was still there, but it had a different quality. Less armor, more effort. "I came back to Seoul because I'm taking a consulting position at Yonsei," she said. "Starting in 4 months. Enough time to settle, find an apartment, get things arranged before," she gestured at herself, a small practical gesture that somehow broke his heart a little, "before everything changes." "That's not what I'm asking." "I know what you're asking." "Then answer it." The scone arrived. She broke a small piece off the edge and didn't eat it. He watched her hands. She still wore no rings, not even the ones she'd favored before they met, the stacked gold ones on her right hand. Her fingers were bare, and there was something about that he couldn't stop noticing. "The child is mine," she said. "Biologically, carried by me, growing inside me, mine." "Sophia." "I'm not finished." Her voice didn't rise. It never rose. "You asked whose child it is. I'm telling you. It's mine. That is the answer that matters most, and I need you to understand that before anything else gets discussed." Sung looked at her for a long time. "And the father?" She met his eyes. "That," she said carefully, "is significantly more complicated than you're ready for right now." "Try me." She shook her head. "Not yet." "Why not?" She picked up the piece of scone she'd broken off, looked at it, set it back down. When she finally spoke again, her voice had dropped slightly, not soft exactly, but less defended. "Because once I tell you," she said, "there are things that are going to happen that I can't take back, and I need to know something first." "What?" She looked at him the way she used to look at him in their hardest moments, fully, directly, without flinching. "When you saw me last night, before you knew anything, before you did the math, before your brain started running its calculations, what did you feel?" The cafe was quiet around them. Someone near the window turned a page. Sung had spent 15 years learning to control what showed on his face. But Sophia had spent 3 years learning to read past it, and he suspected that skill didn't expire. "You know what I felt," he said. She nodded slowly, like she'd needed to hear it confirmed even though she already knew. "Okay," she said quietly. "Then come back tomorrow, same time, and I'll tell you everything." She paused. "And Sung, come alone. No Taeyong waiting outside. No cars I'm not supposed to notice, just you." He agreed. He came alone the next day. She wasn't there. He waited 45 minutes before he called. Voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. He texted 3 words, no punctuation, the way he only communicated when something had stripped the composure off him. Where are you? Nothing. He sat in that cafe for another 20 minutes, because leaving felt like admitting something he wasn't ready to admit, and because part of him kept constructing reasonable explanations. She was tired. The pregnancy had made her unwell overnight. She'd overslept, or the Mapogu traffic had held her up, but Sophia didn't oversleep. Sophia didn't miss appointments without a word. That was not the architecture of the woman he'd been married to. He left at 2:47 and walked 3 blocks before he stopped on the pavement and made a different kind of decision. The civilian version of Sung Jinho, the version that came to small cafes alone and ordered coffee he didn't drink, stepped aside. The other version took over, the one that had built an intelligence network across 4 districts of Seoul, because information was the only currency that never devalued. He called Taeyong. "I need someone at Hotel Naru in the next 10 minutes, he said. Discreetly, I need to know if Sophia Ademi checked out when and whether she left with anyone. Taeyong, to his credit, asked no questions and hung up immediately. The answer came back in 18 minutes. Sophia had checked out at 6:30 that morning. Cash settlement, which the hotel found unusual enough to note. She'd taken her luggage 2 bags. The porter remembered because she'd insisted on carrying the smaller one herself, which had apparently caused him professional distress. A car had been waiting outside, not a taxi, not a rideshare. A private car, black, no plates that matched any registered civilian vehicle in the system. Sung stood very still on the pavement and let that information rearrange everything. She hadn't stood him up because something came up. She'd left before dawn. She'd paid cash. She'd gotten into an unregistered vehicle. Sophia, who was 7 months pregnant, who had come back to Seoul for a job, who had told him to come alone and that she would tell him everything, had disappeared with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been planning an exit while sitting across a cafe table telling him to come back tomorrow. The feeling in his chest was not the tight wire from the restaurant. It was colder than that. It was the specific chill of recognizing that he had been handled. He had one more question now, layered under all the others. Who had told her to run? Because Sophia had decided to tell him something. She'd confirmed that much, come back tomorrow, I'll tell you everything. Something between that moment and 6:30 in the morning had changed her mind completely. Either she'd changed it herself, which was possible, or someone had changed it for her, which was more concerning, and given the kind of life he lived, significantly more likely. He went back to Taeyong. I need everything, he said. Every entry point. Flights, KTX records, any border crossing that logged her name coming back into the country. I want to know exactly when she arrived in Seoul, where she went, and anyone she met with. Taeyong typed something, paused. This might take a few hours. I'll be in the office. He spent those hours doing what he always did when something unsettled him. He worked. He moved through 3 pending negotiations, reviewed the port arrangement his logistics team had flagged, approved 2 transfers, denied 1, and sat through a call with a Japanese associate that required his full attention and got about 60% of it. The remaining 40% was doing its own quiet work, pulling at threads. The report came at 7:15 in the evening. Sophia Ademi had entered South Korea 11 days ago on a Nigerian passport, connecting through Dubai. She hadn't flown directly from Lagos. She'd come from London, where she'd apparently been for 6 weeks prior. She'd been staying at Hotel Naru since arrival. And in 11 days in Seoul, she had met with 3 people whose names appeared in no public record but 2 of which appeared in Sung's private records, because they were connected, thinly, through intermediaries, to a man named Kwon Di-young. Sung read the name twice. Kwon Di-young was 71 years old. He was officially a retired shipping magnate. Unofficially, he was the closest thing Seoul's underworld had to a founding father, the man who had built the original network that Sung's own organization had grown from, who had stepped back 8 years ago and handed various pieces of his operation to various successors, and who now existed in a kind of untouchable elder statesman position that meant nobody moved against him and everybody knew it. Sung had met him exactly 4 times. Their relationship was respectful and carefully distant, The way relationships between very powerful people often were when neither entirely trusted the other. What business did Sophia have with people connected to Kwon Di-young? He called Ti-young into the office and put the report on the desk between them. Ti-young looked at it for a long moment. Coincidence? You know what I think about coincidences. I know. I was hoping you'd make an exception. Sung leaned back in his chair. She said the father was complicated. Those were her exact words. Significantly more complicated than you're ready for. He paused. What kind of man connected to this world produces a child that requires that description? Ti-young said nothing, because the question wasn't really directed at him. And she's been back 11 days, Sung continued. 11 days of meetings before she sits in a restaurant where she knows I'll eventually appear. She didn't accidentally walk into my neighborhood. She put herself there. He stopped. She wanted me to see her. Why? I don't know yet. He stood up, moved to the window. But she was going to tell me something tomorrow that she'd decided I needed to know, and then something or someone convinced her to run instead. Which means whatever she was going to tell me, someone else doesn't want me to know it. He turned from the window. Find her. Ti-young nodded, and was halfway to the door when Sung spoke again. Carefully, Sung said. She's 7 months pregnant. I don't care what else is happening, nobody frightens her, nobody approaches her without my direct instruction. Find her location and bring it to me, nothing else. Understood. The office was quiet after Ti-young left. Sung looked at the report again, at Kwon Di-young's name sitting there between 2 lines of data like a stone dropped into still water. And below it, a detail that Ti-young had highlighted without comment, because he was smart enough to know his boss would want a moment alone with it. The dates of Sophia's London stay, 6 weeks, starting from roughly 10 months ago. 10 months ago. Which placed her in London at the precise window that a 7-month pregnancy would trace back to. And in London, 10 months ago, according to a separate intelligence note attached to the bottom of the report, Kwon Di-young's only son, Kwon Soo-hyun, 34, who officially worked in international finance and unofficially did a great number of things that weren't finance, had been based. For a 3-month residency, overlapping perfectly. Sung set the report down. He sat with that information for a very long time, in a very quiet room, while the city did its indifferent city things outside the window. Then he picked up his phone and made a call that wasn't to Ti-young. A call to a number he used maybe 3 times a year, to a woman named Choi who knew things about people that those people didn't know about themselves. I need a conversation with Kwon Di-young, he said when she answered. A pause. That's a significant ask. I know. Can I ask why? No. Another pause longer. I'll see what I can arrange. It may take a few days. Make it 1, Sung said and hung up. He looked at the report one more time, specifically at the final line Ti-young had added in his neat, careful handwriting, a note that hadn't come from any database or surveillance log, but from a source Ti-young had clearly called personally. It read, the second individual Sophia met with is a lawyer specializing in paternity documentation and child custody law. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Choi came through in 14 hours. The meeting with Kwon Di-young was arranged for the following evening, at a private dining room inside a members-only establishment in Gangnam that had no signage outside and a door that looked like part of the wall. The kind of place where the staff had all signed documents thicker than most people's employment contracts, and where conversations happened because both parties had agreed they needed to, not because either had leverage over the other. Neutral ground, by old-world underworld convention. Sung arrived first, which was intentional. He was already seated, jacket on, hands visible on the table, a gesture of transparency that men of Kwon's generation noticed and appreciated, when the older man came in at exactly 8 o'clock. Kwon Di-young was the kind of old that looked like it had been earned rather than simply accumulated. He was trim, unhurried, with white hair cut close and eyes that had the particular quality of people who had seen enough of human nature to stop being surprised by it. He sat across from Sung with the ease of a man who had held more uncomfortable meetings than this, and survived all of them. "Sung Jinho," he said pleasantly, "you look like your father." "I'll take that as a compliment." It was intended as an observation. Kwon accepted tea from the server and waited until they were alone. "You asked for this meeting with some urgency. I'm curious." Sung had spent the drive over deciding how direct to be. He'd landed on completely. "I want to talk about your son," he said. "Soo Hyun and a woman named Sophia Adami." Not a single muscle in Kwon's face moved, which was itself a kind of answer, because a man who had no idea what you were talking about would have shown some version of confusion, however brief. Kwon showed nothing, and the nothing was too controlled to be innocent. "That's a specific combination of names," Kwon said. "It's a specific situation." Kwon lifted his tea, set it down, looked at Sung with those tired, certain eyes. "She was your wife." "She was." "And you've seen her recently." "In a restaurant 3 nights ago, then a cafe before she disappeared at 6 in the morning with no explanation." Sung kept his voice level. "I'm going to ask you directly, and I'd like a direct answer. Is the child she's carrying your son's?" The silence lasted long enough that Sung counted it. "Yes," Kwon said. The wire was back in Sung's chest, tighter this time, in a different location, not grief exactly, not anger exactly, something with the texture of both that hadn't decided yet what it wanted to be. "Does Soo Hyun know?" Sung asked. Something crossed Kwon's face then, the first unguarded thing. It looked like exhaustion. "Soo Hyun," the old man said carefully, "is not in a position to know anything at the moment." "What does that mean?" Kwon looked at him for a long time. Then he made the kind of decision that Sung recognized because he'd made versions of it himself. The decision to hand someone information, because the cost of withholding it had become higher than the cost of sharing it. "My son has been in a medical facility in Switzerland for the past 5 months, Kwon said. "A private one. What he is being treated for is a family matter, and I won't discuss the specifics. What I will tell you is that he does not know about the pregnancy because Sophia chose not to tell him, and I have respected that choice, because the circumstances of their relationship were." He paused, selecting the word with the precision of a man who chose words the way other men chose weapons. "Complicated." She used that word too. "It's the accurate word." Sung leaned forward slightly. "Kwon SSI, I'm going to be honest with you. Sophia came back to Seoul, placed herself where I'd find her, and was preparing to tell me something significant before she ran. Someone persuaded her to run. I need to know who, and I need to know why she was going to tell me whatever she was going to tell me." Kwon was quiet for a moment. "You think I had her pulled?" "I think someone did." "It wasn't me." He said it flatly, without defense, the tone of a man who didn't bother performing innocence because he'd long since stopped caring whether people believed him or not. "I knew she was in Seoul. I knew she'd made contact with you. I did not intervene." He paused. "I was, in fact, not entirely displeased that she'd found you." "Why?" Kwon looked at him steadily. "Because there are people who are unhappy about this child's existence, Sung Jinho. People who understand what it means if Soo Hyun has a legitimate heir while he is indisposed. People for whom the simplest solution to a complicated inheritance question is for that child to never arrive safely." The temperature in the room didn't change, but something in Sung's body registered it differently. "Who?" His voice came out quieter than before, which meant something different from how most people got quieter. "There are 3 men in my former organization who have been positioning themselves during my son's absence. They know about Sophia. They've known for 2 months." Kwon's jaw tightened slightly, the first physical sign of feeling the old man had shown. "I have been managing the situation, but my reach is not what it once was, and they are aware of that." 3 men, Sung said. "Names." "I'm not prepared to hand you names and watch what you do with them without understanding your interest first." Kwon tilted his head slightly. "Why do you care about this child, Sung? You and Sophia are divorced. She built this life away from you, with my son, knowingly or otherwise. What is your position here?" It was a fair question. Sung had been asking himself a version of it since the restaurant. I don't have a position yet, he said honestly. But Sophia was going to tell me something, and whatever it was important enough that someone moved to stop it before she could. That means the information is still relevant. And if there are people in this city who are a threat to her, then that's a problem I'm going to address regardless of what my official position is. Kwon studied him. You still love her? Sung didn't answer. It's not an accusation, the old man said, almost gently. It's a relevant variable. Love makes people useful in situations like this. It also makes them unpredictable, which concerns me. I'm never unpredictable. Every man is unpredictable about the things that matter most to him. Kwon stood slowly, with the deliberate movement of someone who had learned to conserve energy. I'll give you one name, the one most immediately dangerous. In exchange, I want your word that Sophia and the child are protected, not because you're doing me a favor, but because you've decided it's the right thing. You have my word. Kwon buttoned his jacket. Han Byung-rak. He was my logistics director for 11 years. He's been managing the interest of the other two since Soo Hyun's hospitalization. He knows where Sophia is staying now. He has people in 3 of the major hotels. He paused at the door. She didn't check into a hotel this morning, by the way. She went somewhere else. Somewhere she thought was safe. Where? Kwon looked at him with something that might have been, in another man, the beginning of trust. Her friend, the woman from the restaurant, Amara, she has an apartment in Siatimungu. He paused. Han Byung-rak doesn't know that yet, but he will within 48 hours because he has someone inside her phone carrier. Another pause. You have less time than that. Sung was already standing. One more thing, Kwon said from the doorway, and something in his voice made Sung go still. The reason Sophia was going to tell you everything, the old man said quietly. It wasn't just about the danger. It wasn't just about protection. He looked at Sung with those exhausted, knowing eyes. She had a second set of tests done, 3 weeks ago at a clinic in London before she came here. He let a beat pass. I think you should ask her about those tests yourself. But I will tell you this. The reason she looked at you the way she did in that restaurant, the reason she put herself in your path, the reason she was prepared to tell you everything. Kwon paused at the door, hand resting on the frame, is because the child she is carrying may not be my son's after all. The line went dead. Sung looked at the phone like it had personally offended him, then looked at Sophia, and the thing on her face wasn't panic. It was worse than panic. It was the expression of someone who had just watched their most carefully constructed safety net get cut from below. Her hand had gone to her stomach in that automatic way he'd noticed she did when something frightened her, and he registered it and filed it and moved. Get up, he said, not unkindly. We're leaving. Sung. Now, Sophia, gently take your time, but now. She got up. He was already calling Taeyong, already moving toward the hallway, already running the calculation. 2 men outside gone meant they hadn't been neutralized. They'd been pulled back deliberately, which meant Han Byung-rak wanted him to know he could remove pieces from the board whenever he chose. A demonstration, not an attack. Yet. Taeyong picked up on the first ring. The 2 outside. I know, Taeyong said grimly. They walked around the corner and I lost visual 20 seconds ago. I have 3 more on the way, but... We're coming out the back. Is there a back? A brief pause. Service exit, ground floor, leads to the alley behind the convenience store. I'm pulling up the building layout now. Another pause. Yes, left out of the stairwell, 3rd door, push not pull. Amara appeared in the hallway already holding Sophia's bag, coat in hand, with the expression of a woman who had assessed the situation at speed and decided that questions could wait. Sung looked at her with brief, genuine appreciation. You've done this before, he said. My uncle was a politician in Abuja, she said simply. Come. They went down the stairwell, Amara ahead, Sophia in the middle, Sung behind with his hand not quite touching Sophia's back, but close enough that if she slowed he'd know immediately. The building was quiet around them, the kind of quiet that felt like held breath. 3rd door, push not pull, alley behind the convenience store, cold air and the smell of food waste and a black car already idling 10 meters away with Taeyong standing outside it. He had Sophia in the back seat in under a minute. Amara folded in beside her without being asked. Sung took the front. "Where are we going?" Sophia asked. "Somewhere Han Byung-rak has no file on," Sung said. They drove for 30 minutes, route changing twice, Taeyong taking turns that had no destination logic until he was satisfied. They ended up at a property in Yunpyeong-gu that existed in no document connected to Sung's name. A clean, quiet house registered to a shell company that had never been traced back to him in 7 years of use. 3 bedrooms, a full kitchen, the kind of ordinary residential face that attracted no attention from any direction. Inside, Sung got Sophia settled on the sofa with water and a blanket that Taeyong produced from somewhere with the efficiency of a man who had furnished safe houses before. Amara sat beside her. Taeyong took a position near the front window, quiet as furniture. Sung stood in the middle of the room and thought. The clinic in London. We own it. If that was true, and Han Byung-rak had said it with the confidence of someone who didn't need to lie, then the 89% probability was engineered. The lineage markers, the chromosomal projections, the careful numerical packaging of hope, all of it potentially constructed by people who had a stake in Sophia believing, and more importantly in Sung believing, that this child might be his. But why? What did Han Byung-rak gain from Sung believing he might be the father? He turned it over, and arrived somewhere cold and precise. If the child was definitively Soo-hyun's, and Soo-hyun was incapacitated, then the child became a complication for Han Byung-rak's positioning, a potential heir that interrupted a clean power transfer. Eliminating Sophia solved that. But eliminating Sophia had a cost if it was traced back, and Kwon Di-young, diminished as he was, still had enough reach to make that cost significant. But if Sophia was instead drawn into Sung's orbit, if Sung believed the child was potentially his, if Sung's considerable resources and protection became wrapped around her, then Han Byung-rak achieved something cleaner. Sophia and the child would be Sung's problem, and Sung, distracted and emotionally compromised for the first time in years, would be easier to manage. The test results weren't proof of his paternity. They were a leash. He looked at Sophia. She was watching him from the sofa with the expression of someone who had followed his thought process at least partway, and was waiting to see where he landed. "The test," he said, "the 89%, I need you to consider that it may have been fabricated." She was quiet for a moment. "I've been considering it since he said it." And she stopped. Her hand went to her stomach again, and I don't know what to do with that, because part of me believed it before I ever walked into that clinic, before any test, before any number. She looked at him. "We were together for 3 years, Sung, and the only medical evidence that you couldn't father a child came from one test, one doctor, one very specific moment when you were on medication that apparently nobody flagged." She paused. "So I don't know if the 89% is real or manufactured, but I know that the question underneath it, the real question, that one was always there." He crossed the room and sat across from her. "We do our own test," he said. "Independent clinic, no connection to anyone in this world. The moment the child arrives or before, if it's safe, we find out the truth on our own terms." "And Han Byung-rak." "Han Byung-rak," Sung said evenly, "is going to discover that using my emotions as a strategic instrument is the most expensive mistake he's made in an 11-year career." Something moved in her eyes, not quite relief, not quite warmth, something that lived between the two. "Sung," she said his name quietly, "whatever the test says." "Whatever the test says," he confirmed. Taeyong cleared his throat softly from the window. Sung looked at him. "The car that was across from Amara's building," Taeyong said. "We just got an ID on the plates, not Han Byung-rak's people." He paused, and the pause was the kind that preceded information that reorganized everything. "They're registered to a private security firm that works exclusively for one client." Sung waited. Taeyong looked at him steadily. "Kwon Di-young." The room was very still. Sophia's face had gone carefully neutral. Amara looked at the floor. Sung felt the architecture of the last 72 hours shift beneath him like ground that had been sand all along. Kwon Di-young, who had given him Han Byung-rak's name, who had told him about the tests, who had, piece by deliberate piece, walked Sung Jin-ho directly into the center of a situation involving his incapacitated son, an unborn child, and a woman Sung had never stopped loving, who had been watching Amara's building, not to protect Sophia. To watch Sung. He stood slowly. "Call the clinic in Lagos," he said to no one in particular, his voice coming from somewhere very quiet. "Her original fertility specialist, the one who started all of this." He looked at Sophia. "What's her name?" Sophia's face had gone the color of someone who had just felt the floor move. "Dr. Adiz Anwasu," she whispered. "Call her," Sung said, "right now." Sophia picked up her phone with a hand that wasn't entirely steady. She found the number. She called. It rang 6 times, then a recorded message, the generic automated kind that meant the number had been recently disconnected. She lowered the phone. They looked at each other. And from somewhere outside the quiet house in Yunpyonggu, in the ordinary residential street that no document connected to Sung Jin-ho, a car door closed. Then another. Then footsteps, more than 2 people, unhurried, coming toward the front of the house like people who had always known exactly where they were going. Taeyong stepped back from the window. His face said everything his voice didn't. Sung reached for Sophia's hand. She let him take it. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. The doorbell rang. If you need to know what happens next, who's at that door, whose child Sophia is really carrying, and what Kwon Di-young has been building toward all along, subscribe and turn on notifications. Part 2 drops when you make enough noise for it.